Welcome to the Breakthrough Success Podcast, helping you achieve that breakthrough you've always been looking for in your business. And now your host, Marc Guberti. Hello and welcome. I am your host, Marc Guberti, and this is the podcast for marketers and small business owners who are looking for the breakthrough for their businesses. I am very excited about this show. We are going to explore our guest, Jeffrey Shaw's backstory of starting a successful podcast. Jeffrey is a coach for business owners, a public speaker, and the man behind the Creative Warriors podcast. Welcome to the show, Jeffrey.
Well, I am thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me, Mark. I'm really honored.
My pleasure, Jeffrey. So the way that I start all of my episodes is I ask people the why, behind why they started. So I'm curious, Jeffrey, why did you start your Creative Warriors podcast?
Well, probably not for a reason that you would think, or probably that any normal person would start a podcast. For me, it was a personal challenge. I've always been the guest in life. I was a photographer. I still am a photographer, but I've been a photographer for 32 years, and I photograph on location. I photograph families and children. So I have spent my life being the guest. I was the guest in other people's homes. I was the guest on their vacations to photograph their family. And then I became a guest on a lot of other people's podcasts. So the personal challenge for me, and the reason I started the podcast, is I wondered if people would show up if I was the host. Like it became a challenge as to my worth in a way. Like, was I worth people showing up for? And so that's why I started the show, and I'm happy to say that I found out that people would show up.
I'm happy to hear that you've had a lot of guests on your podcast. The way that I started is sort of similar to yours. I was the guest for a lot of different things, for guest posts and guests on podcasts as well. I actually tried twice to start a podcast, but it didn't go so well. So this is my third attempt, so it's finally happening.
Awesome. Well, you're off to a good start. Not because I'm your guest, but because you're prepared.
Thank you. So take yourself back to before you hit the breakthrough and got your success. So your podcast is just starting out. And what were you thinking about that path in front of you?
You know, there's a theme actually in a lot of my entrepreneurial efforts that I don't look that far down the path. And I know that's contradictory to, you hear a lot about planning and that's a part of it. But I don't look so far down the path that I can't change course. So for me, I have to say, it's been 2 years now that I have had Creative Warriors podcast, and I didn't look ahead 2 years. I didn't look ahead as to what was down the road. It was kind of learning and growing in the moment. What I saw ahead of me, again, as I said, was sort of this personal challenge. Would people show up? But I can't say I looked much further than that.
That's interesting, because sometimes if we set our deadlines and we're very specific on our goals, like sometimes I'm guilty of this, I'll set the deadline or the goal, and then I learn something new that completely changes the way that I'm thinking about what I want to do with my goals and my priorities. So I sometimes shift what I have to do. So that's a very interesting angle as to just not look too far down and just focus on what you are doing in the moment.
Yeah, it's kind of a blend. Like you can have an idea as to where you want to end up, but you just, the path in front of you, it's going to change, especially nowadays. What if a new podcasting technology came out tomorrow that dramatically affected negatively or positively how we did this? So you can kind of have a vision, but today more than ever, you really have to be ready to change course if needed.
So we now know that how you view this whole beginning point of starting a podcast, but what type of work did it take you to reach the breakthrough, especially the beginning where you may not be getting as many downloads at this point, or you're just trying to get your first couple of guests? So what type of work helped you to achieve the breakthrough?
It's a great question, because I think it's the answer to a lot of success, and it's kind of a blend of, you could say it's inside work, outside work. It's the art and science. There's one common denominator in everything in my career, whether it's photography or, I also enjoy cooking and gardening, and podcasting is the same way. I'm drawn to things that are both an art and a science, and that things that require kind of a sense of design or inner personal development, as well as a science to it. And that was the thing with podcasting that I had to learn, because I tend to lean towards the personal development side. I tend to lean towards the inner work. What I realized in podcasting is that in order to be successful, it's a blend of both. You have to be clear on your message. You have to be clear on the theme of your show. But there's a significant amount of science behind podcasting. How you tag things, how you keyword, the algorithms that you work with, how the different social media networks, which is better to leverage, where to put your time, because you have to create this to spread. So because you can have, otherwise you're like an artist who's super, super talented, but nobody knows that you're alive. Right. Same thing with podcasting. You can have a great show, but if you don't know the science and the algorithms of life, if you will, as far as how technology works, then your show may not be popular. So you can't have one without the other. You have to have both.
So the way I see it, it was easier for you to do the interviews. It was just a matter of getting into the whole psyche of what it takes to do the podcast episodes and to do the research to see how you spread these podcast episodes to get more downloads.
Yeah, for me, and this is the side that'll probably be easier for you because you're of a much younger mindset than I am. This technology is second nature to you, and you more than probably most people in your generation. You're so good at it. But for me, I always had the quality down. I had a quality show. I had the quality, the content. I had all that down. That's the stuff that comes natural to me. How things go viral on the internet is not as natural for me. I had to learn that. That's the science part. And a lot of it, the breakthrough moment for me came, literally breakthrough in that our downloads tripled in a single month because I started tagging and keywording when, believe it or not, I hadn't been before that. So suddenly, it was brought to my attention, well, you have to keyword these episodes, and there's a tool called ID3 Editor that, we started using, and our downloads tripled in a month because I not only had a good quality show, I was now playing nicely with the science of it.
So that's a really good angle as to how you would go about mastering podcasting. But I don't think it's just how you mastered podcasting, just anything in general. You just put in a lot of research, apply the methods, and then see what happens and experiment along with it.
Yeah, and hire people. I have to say that stupidly, here I am as a business coach. When I went into podcasting, I didn't pay for training. I just dove in. That's kind of my style. You give me an idea, I'm going to dive in with both feet. But hire people that are further down the road than you. Hire coaches, hire mentors, take training programs, even workshops, go to conferences. All these things will shave years and so much trouble right off the top if you can just learn what other people have already learned before you.
I could not agree more with that statement, because there are people who know more than us. Like, no matter how much we could obtain, there's always going to be that one, or basically thousands of people who know things that we do not know about our own niches. So it's good to go through training courses, get mentors, and just learn as much as you can about your niche to make it happen.
You got it.
So what was your biggest source of motivation that helped you reach the breakthrough?
And again, I love these questions because they get me thinking broader than even the podcast, just in throughout my career. And I think my biggest motivation has always been the way I want to live my life. Always, how I lived my life and the rewards of working hard have always been the most important to me. So for podcasting, what drove me and what a big motivator was creating a life that was more location independent. I just moved to Miami Beach. It's just been a week or two, I guess, technically. We came down for the winter in January, intending on just being here for 3 months, which became 4 months. And in the fourth month, we decided, let's not go back to Manhattan, which I'm from and I love. But living on the beach is just too sweet to leave. So we moved, and so I'm glad now that I had 2 years ago created a life that was more location independent, because now literally on a whim, I could decide, I think I'll move. So what has always motivated me is the lifestyle I wanted to live. And, my greatest motivation now is being completely independent, so I can pick up a laptop and a mic, and even for my business coaching, it's all done over the phone or it's done over the internet. So I have a completely independent lifestyle. So lifestyle has always first been my motivator, and then I've built my businesses to fit into the life that I wanted to live.
That's really awesome. That type of life is pretty awesome. I mean, there are people who live that similar lifestyle. They could probably attest to that also, because you just get to choose what you do and where you live and all that fun stuff.
You got it. Yep.
So we talked about this a little bit. You mentioned about living the life that you want to live, but what is the best thing about hitting that breakthrough?
I'll say peace of mind, and I also want to call it clarity, because let me talk about the most challenging thing, and we all go through this, and particularly startups and the people that I coach. I ask myself, so that I can serve people best, I will occasionally ask myself the kind of cliche question, what keeps my audience up at night? And for the people that I serve, creatives in business, what keeps them up at night is not knowing where they're going. And all the frustration and the angst that comes with not being clear on where you're going and what it feels like to work around the clock and not be sure you're getting anywhere, and literally working hard and looking at your checking account and not getting ahead. So I know those feelings. So what the greatest benefit to me of that breakthrough moment is not having those feelings. Like when you actually feel clear, you know where you're going, you know who you're serving, you know what your core message is and the work that you're doing. Man, that to me is the sweetest feeling and one I strive for all the time.
That's really awesome, because just to have that clarity and know where you're going, it just makes other things easier. It's easier to explore more in your niche. It's easier to do other things that previously seemed difficult. So I'm very happy that you mentioned that as the best thing about hitting the breakthrough.
Most definitely. It also makes you more pleasant to be around to other people too, I'll tell you.
Yeah, definitely. So what advice do you have for entrepreneurs who are trying to reach their breakthrough? Because I know there are some listeners who maybe some of them have hit their breakthrough, they're looking to expand. Others, they haven't hit that breakthrough and they want to know, how do I get this breakthrough?
Yeah. It's, I know. And we're always looking for a break. Like I'm looking for another breakthrough. We're always looking for another breakthrough. I think you have to understand that too. So that's one bit of advice, to know that life is not linear and the learning never stops. And I say life is not linear, and especially the journey of an entrepreneur, it is not a straight linear path. There are a lot of curves, bends, twists, and turns to the process, and peaks and valleys. So I would love another breakthrough, and what I'm strategizing towards is a breakthrough in my life where I am much more in demand as a public speaker. I do a fair amount of public speaking, but those events that we tend to initiate or we reach out, I'm looking for what's referred to as inbound marketing, where I've put enough content in the world that suddenly people are contacting me out of the blue to speak at their major event. So that would be a next breakthrough for me. So one piece of advice most definitely is to understand that it's not a linear path. The other one is to gain that clarity. I have an online coaching program called the Creative Warrior Unleashed, and the entire point behind that program, the Creative Warrior Unleashed, is to help people get clear on the journey they want to go on, to get clear on the work that they're doing in their core message, to get clear on their branding message so that it's marketable, and then have clear and actionable practices in their business. So, that's another big piece of advice, is to just get really clear. So that involves a certain amount of personal development. And then the last thing I'll mention is to get into action. Do not get held up by, I'm not ready yet, things aren't perfect. Be of what I refer to as a beta mind. Think about beta software, things that are put out in the world before it's perfected, and then you allow the audience that you're serving and talking to help you develop it from there. I tell my coaching clients, be 70% ready. Don't even think about being any more than 70% ready, and allow the feedback to complete the process. So I refer to it as the beta mind. Get into action, get it out there, and nurture and grow whatever it is that you're developing in the business that you're launching based on the feedback you receive.
That is some awesome advice for entrepreneurs who are trying to reach that breakthrough. I think the key thing there, just have the clarity, but also don't try to be perfect, because some people try to make the whole process perfect, be completely ready. As you mentioned, it's great to just be 70% ready and nothing more than that, because starting is definitely the hardest part. I've learned that with this podcast, but once you start, it just gets a lot easier to follow through and finish up with the goal.
Yeah. The learning starts from there, most definitely.
So there are some people right now who are listening to this and they're starting their own podcast or they're thinking about it and they want to know, how do I build a successful podcast? So what are 3 tips that you have for the people in the audience who are thinking, how do I make this podcast successful?
So first and foremost, you really have to define your, avatar, if you want to call it that. Who are the 1 or 2 individuals, maybe in your life or that you can visualize, that pretend you're speaking to them and they represent the whole, which is different than marketing suggestions used to be. We used to talk about defining your market or knowing your target market. I think it's better, particularly with podcasting, to pretend you're having a conversation with one person that represents the whole and get really clear on the needs of that person. Like, what do they need to hear? So that you can develop your questions imagining what they want to know, which kind of leads into my second piece of advice, is to understand your role. Your role changed. As you said, you've been a guest a lot of times. When you become the host of a podcast, you are now the conduit or the facilitator. It's really not about you as the host. You need to, if you've vetted the best guests, you have a guest on one hand and you have your audience, your avatar on the other hand, and you are the conduit to bring those 2 things together. So you have a very different role than you've ever had before on the air. And then the last piece of advice I would offer when starting a podcast is to think about the industry as a whole. And I say that because currently right now I'm a little sensitive to how quickly the industry of podcasting is growing and that there's some gaming going on, and the gaming is catching up to people, and it always will. I have never, my 32 years as an entrepreneur, I have never been the person who takes shortcuts. I'm in it for the long haul. I want sustainable success, and I've always worked hard to not just protect the integrity of an industry, but to actually better the integrity. So stay away from any hacks and gaming. There's a lot of gaming going on in rating and reviews where people are just rating and reviewing one another's shows, but not actually listening to it. So, what's iTunes going to do? iTunes knows this. So eventually they're going to drop the importance of rating and reviews, because you want your ratings and your reviews on iTunes to be legit so that when the next person wants to find a good podcast, they believe those rating and reviews. It's like Yelp in a way, right? You don't want Yelp gamed because then it becomes an unreliable source of quality. So, so that's my third piece of advice, is to think long terms. Let's make everybody, all podcasters, successful, particularly down the road, and try to avoid taking shortcuts and hacks.
Those are some great tips for podcasters. It's really tempting to take the quick cut. Like when I first got into this, I thought it was like get rich quick schemes, and I thought they were like the golden ticket. But if you go and look at them, you realize that they're really not the golden ticket, and there's really no overnight success or anything of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, there's some podcasters have gamed this system such that iTunes has shut down their shows and you can't recover. You can't get your show back. So,
wow.
Play by the rules. It's worth it for the long haul.
So the next question is, what is your favorite inspirational quote and why?
All right, this might very well be the toughest question, only because I have so many quotes in my head. I literally am a trove of my own quotes. Plus, there's all these other amazing people in the world whose quotes I love. So, gosh, let me see if I can pick one. All right, because it seems to be more aligned with what we've been talking about. I'm going to go with the quote that I'm not sure if it's my own, my father's, or something I read somewhere. I have no idea who to attribute this to, but it's make a decision and make it right. And that is probably the quote I live by. I try to recommend that you not get hung up on, are you making the quote unquote right decision? Just make a decision and then make it right. Do everything in your power. And if you think about that, I mean, failure is no longer failure if you look at it that way, because if you decide to do something, whatever the outcome is, if you try to make it right, how can you fault yourself? How can you see it as a failure? Right? So, hey, like I said, I just moved to Miami Beach. Was it the right decision? It was such a crazy, quick decision. I still have a thriving photography business up north that I now have to figure out how to fly back and forth to accommodate my clients. And a lot of things weren't thought through. But the one thing I've always had confidence in my life is that I make really quick decisions. And then I put all my effort and strategy into making it right.
Jeffrey, thank you for providing us with all these nuggets of useful information for achieving the breakthrough and tips for podcasters. So right now, people may be wondering, where do we find Jeffrey Shaw on the web?
Hopefully everywhere if I've done my job well. So, one thing I like to offer and suggest to people is I have this fun little free 7-day online mini course that you can take called Week of the Warrior. So it's a good way to kind of see where you stand in your warrior spirit, and some really good learning lessons in there. So your listeners can get that at weekofthewarrior.com. And that gives you a really good taste of my philosophies and the way that I think. So again, that's weekofthewarrior.com. And then my community website, which is another great place to find me where I'm most active, is creativewarriorsunite.com. That's where my podcast resides. That's where my trainings are. It's also a link to our private Facebook group, which your listeners can join and be part of the community on Facebook as well. So creativewarriorsunite.com is another avenue.
Thank you for letting us know different places we could find you on the web. Those links will be within the show notes of this podcast. Jeffrey, thank you for being a guest on this podcast. It was wonderful to have you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, and best of luck to you in your endeavor.
Thank you. What a great interview. That was a tip for anyone starting a podcast. Make sure your first guest is someone who's been podcasting for a while. Jeffrey dropped some valuable nuggets for us on crushing it with our own podcasts. What I also enjoyed hearing is that he's constantly learning. Since you're listening to this podcast, then you're constantly learning too, and you're moving closer to your breakthrough. If you forgot to take notes, then don't worry, we've got you covered with the show notes. Visit marcguberti.com/E1. You can ask questions over there, which I'll be happy to answer. To never miss an episode, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on whatever player you are using. If you are a regular listener and have not done so already, I would greatly appreciate it if you could give the podcast a rating and or a review. Two ways you can do this are through marcguberti.com/iTunes or marcguberti.com/Stitcher. That ends this episode. Don't forget, dream big, achieve greatness, and unlock your potential today. How does over 100 retweets per day sound to you? My free ebook, 27 Ways to Get More Retweets on Twitter, has you covered. I use the methods within this ebook to get over 10,000 retweets every single quarter. To learn more and get access to this free resource, visit marcguberti.com/retweets. This podcast is a production done by Marc Guberti. For more insights, head on over to marcguberti.com.